is going to be the Donovan Mitchell stuff. We'll get into the Lonzo Ball stuff. And then, of course, I have one more news article to talk about. And that's, of course, potential prospects playing against each other coming in the next couple months, which will be very spicy. So I'm excited to talk about that with you, Pete. But
yeah.
Obviously, we got to talk first, of course, is this story from Real GM. Gurus Rosas handled Donovan Mitchell trade negotiations for the Knicks. I'll read the article. It goes on to say, the New York Knicks had Rosas serve as the primary negotiator in trade talks with Utah Jazz on Donovan Mitchell. The Jazz had Justin Zanuck leading the negotiations on their end, which left Leon Rose and Danny Ainge largely out of the process from a communication standpoint. Rose and Ainge never spoke directly to each other during the negotiations, sources tell Gary Washburn of the Boston Globe. Kind of interesting that the Boston Globe is reporting on this. But Rosas was hired by the Knicks as a consultant in February, but took control of the Mitchell talks due to his relationship with Zanuck. The Minnesota Timberwolves parted ways with Rosas last September. The Knicks were considered the front runners and eventually acquired Mitchell, but trades broke down after they agreed to sign RJ Barrett to sign a contract extension. Utah pivoted talks with Cleveland. Obviously, that trade happened. The Knicks were reluctant to give up both Grimes and Barrett in a trade for Mitchell. Pete, I've said all I need to say. What do you have to say about this?
Let's get the Gerson Rosas part out of the way first, just because I feel like it's pretty interesting. This is a guy who was the general manager for the Timberwolves for a while.
Right.
The only trade that I can really think of Gerson Rosas actually making did not go very well for Minnesota. So I'm a little curious why this was it. The only trade I can think of being the Andrew Wiggins, what's his name? D'Angelo Russell trade with the Warriors, which we know how that kind of panned out. I mean, the Warriors won that trade. That was a really great trade for them.
Yep.
We see how Wiggins has turned out. And I mean, part of that is institutional, right? You have to wonder, like, what would Wiggins have been earlier in his career if he hadn't been stuck with the Timberwolves? Would he have been that guy that we saw in the finals and in the the Western Conference Finals before that, right? All that being said, this leads me to wonder how serious the Knicks really were about this trade, right?
Yeah.
And maybe this is me just putting my tinfoil, conspiracy cap on, right? But I am very curious if they're letting a new hire in Gerson Rosas, somebody who's an assistant, right, for this squad. But not only just an assistant, somebody who was fired for not doing a very good job for a really terrible team. How serious were these dudes about getting this trade done in the first place? I'm pretty curious about that because it makes me think that they didn't really want him all that bad. Because if that's the case, you would put all your top dogs on the job. Leon Rose is an agent extraordinaire by all these people who talk about him all the time, right? Why is he not leading these negotiations if you really want Donovan Mitchell? Which leads me to believe that this trade was kind of like, how do I put it? I think they were trying to either get a little lucky and get the trade for a solid deal where they didn't have to worry about it too much, or it was kind of a smokescreen. And why it would be a smokescreen, I have no idea. But there's been a lot of these kind of weird NBA people kind of hiding their true intentions this offseason between different front offices. And I think the other big one that comes to my mind is Orlando with the number 1 pick, right? Like they had all this time to say who they were really interested in, and then it comes the final night, smokescreen is unveiled, they take Paolo Banchero, right?
Yeah.
I'm of the same level of like, what is the point of this if you're going to let Gerson Rosas do it, right? Now, to the actual trade, just so we can get it out of the way. I'm actually pretty glad that the Knicks did not make the trade. Specifically, the original trade that was reported, which was, I believe it was RJ, Obi, Quickly, and then 3 firsts and 2 pick swaps, I think is what I saw. It might have been just 3 picks, though, which is why it didn't go through. I actually think, Bernie, and maybe you already said this, I'll be honest with you, I haven't had a chance to go back and listen to the beginning of that stream. I caught the second half of it where you talked about your thoughts. But I feel like the Jazz got kind of fleeced in this trade for Donovan Mitchell. And maybe fleeced is not the right word, but they could have had so much more from the Knicks. Don't you think? Like the package they ended up with is pretty questionable, I would say. And definitely in comparison to the Rudy Gobert trade, right? Like they got 200 cents on the dollar in the Rudy Gobert trade. And I would honestly say that they probably got 80 cents on the dollar, maybe 70 cents on the dollar for Donovan Mitchell. Because what they ended up with is picks from a team that's going to be really good for the next 5 to 10 years, right? Presumably, if all things go well with this Cavaliers team, they're going to
Mm-hmm.
be really good in the conference. So their picks aren't going to be that valuable. On top of that, they didn't get any player I would consider anywhere near what RJ is, if that was actually the offer from the Knicks. I wouldn't even say Colin Sexton is like 70% of the player that RJ has shown. And you could disagree with me because I'm a bit of a homer, but I think Colin Sexton has showed to be almost like a Russell Westbrook in training at certain times. Like he can score. I will never say that Colin Sexton can't score in the NBA. Certainly can score. The question is he
Mm-hmm.
really a guy that can get you wins? And maybe if this is what Utah was really looking for to get players that make them bad, this is kind of the perfect guy. Getting Colin Sexton to be your number one guy almost at this point, the way it's looking. He's probably going to be one of the most talented players on the team from a youth and like who's going to be getting touches.
Yeah.
I don't think he's very good, you know? Am I crazy, Bernie, to think that that trade wasn't really good for the Jazz?
Here's what I will say, and I'll use your own rhetoric against you here. It's a
I would love to hear it.
it's about the timeline. And that's it.
Yeah.
No, but it is really about the timeline. I think if we really think about it, the Jazz right now are no way ready to compete. I will be surprised if they don't unload guys like Michael Conley, guys like Jordan Clarkson off to teams that need those type
All
of players. Because
Bogdanovich gone.
Bogdanovich gone. Because again, what it comes down to me for what the Jazz are trying to do, they are trying to basically scorch the earth in order to restart and kind of plant the tree again, if you will, to create what they had just a couple years back with Donovan Mitchell, with Rudy Gobert, and Bogdanovich. They realized that they need to restart again, and I just think that the reason why they decided to go for this trade instead of the RJ Barrett one or any of those other things is because when I think about it, if you trade RJ Barrett, you trade Quentin Grimes. Not saying that the Jazz will be contenders, but this is definitely be a team that is not necessarily going to be the worst team in the NBA.
It'd be better than they will be with Colin Sexton. That's for sure. Like it's not even a question of what they ended up. And that's I
Mhm.
can't disagree with you. Like if it really is a matter of the timeline, right? But here's the one thing, and this would be my counter to that, Bernie.
Ooh, the
Right?
counter, the Uno.
The counter to the counter. Okay, this is my filibuster. Couldn't they just have gotten more picks and less players in return? Why not? Like, doesn't that make sense? Like, they could have just gone with some package where they got 5 picks from the Knicks or 6 picks from the Knicks. They only take Fournier's contract, and then they do that weird deal with the Lakers to take Westbrook and then buy him out, or even keep Westbrook and truly be terrible, right? Like, I feel like there was pathways for the Jazz to take that led them with a better package of assets, one, and two,
Hmm.
they would have been just as bad. So I honestly, and this is now where my galaxy brain starts to come into effect here, Bernie. Right? Do you think that this just boils down to a pissing match between the Knicks front office and Danny Ainge? Because to me, this Gerson Rosas news that's coming out is 100% confirmation of that. The Jazz, and in particular Danny Ainge, Mr. Pooh Shiesty of the NBA himself, right?
Push shiesty.
This man took in my mind, it's undeniably a worse trade package than what he was offered, right? The Knicks were the front leaders for this whole debacle of this Mitchell trade. And now we find out that they were having kind of the B team even communicating with Utah, right? So I'm curious if it basically just boils down to Danny Ainge and the Utah Jazz just saying, you know what? We're sick and tired of this. We don't want to deal with the Knicks anymore. They're playing too hard to get with, this crazy amount of picks they have. And we have to talk to Gerson Rosas. They're not even sending their head honchos here to talk to us. So we're just going to take the trade that's available, and that is the Cleveland Cavaliers trade, right? Because by all accounts, Cleveland had dropped out. Secretly, it swung back around and made this trade. So I'm pretty interested why the talks, fell apart so quickly. If it was just the RJ contract extension that made the Jazz's front office, got him pissed off, or whatever it was. Maybe it's the fact that Gerson Rosas, this, B leaguer who got fired, 10 months ago, and now he's the lead negotiator for this trade. So I'm pretty interested how much of that plays into it. But now let me just give my last little thoughts on the trade itself, right?
Yeah.
Cleveland just elevated themselves into championship contenders, in my opinion. I don't think they're in the top 5 championship contenders this season. But if you're looking 2, 3, 4 seasons down the road, I mean, this is one of the best young cores the NBA has seen in the last 10 years, in my opinion. Like, you have a very, very deep, just well of talented players. Whether or not they're good enough to start is not the point. You have at least 4 starters on this squad guaranteed. Mobley, Allen, Garland, Donovan Mitchell. That right there is going to give a lot of teams a lot of problems.
Yeah.
What is Brooklyn ever going to do against that team? What could they even dream of doing defensively to slow Cleveland down? They couldn't do anything because you have guards like Seth Curry and Kyrie Irving who don't play defense now against 2 of the better offensive young talents in the league. And then you have 2 7-footers in the paint waiting to play defense who can also stretch the floor too a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Jared Allen, not as much, but Evan Mobley is going to be a better 3-point shooter next year than he was last year. I love this Cleveland team. I know that I had a pretty strong reaction to Minnesota when they traded for Rudy Gobert. And I said that they were championship contenders in kind of in the loosest sense I could say. Like, I think they legitimately could have a chance to make it to the finals. Am I saying I think they're going to win? Probably not. They're not the best team. They're still too young. And we go to the timeline, Bernie, my rhetoric, as you like to call it, the timeline rhetoric on this channel. Cleveland, I feel like, really, truly understood the timeline, in my opinion, right? Yeah. And this would come up for debate with other people, but I think you have literally a generational talent who's 20 right now in Evan Mobley. You have somebody who is an all-star, all-NBA player in the making in Garland. And you have an incredibly solid, like the only word you could even use to describe Jared Allen in the NBA is just solid. He's so solid. He gives you all the fundamentals of a big. He does everything you need him to. He doesn't ask too much. He doesn't do not enough. He does everything right for what his position asks for him.
Yeah.
And now you have Donovan Mitchell, who has a glaring weakness on defense, but you have arguably one of it. I know, Bernie, I was riding the Mobley train super hard last season. So much so that I told you I genuinely thought that Mobley had a chance to win Defensive Player of the Year in his rookie season. And lo and behold, he probably was top 10 in Defensive Player of the Year voting if you were to go that deep. He probably is at the bottom 10, but he was up there. This season, he's only going to be better. So now you have a legitimate Defensive Player of the Year candidate on your team. You have Jared Allen, who's a great defender. Isaac Okoro, who only is going to be asked to play defense because he's such a good defender. He can't shoot, but now you don't need him to shoot. This is like the ideal 76ers roster they put together, except they're younger and on better contracts for the most part and healthier usually. So I love Cleveland. I love Cleveland. I know I just went on a Skip Bayless-esque rant here, but I love this squad. I legitimately think they're one of the 5 best teams in the East, like bar none. I don't even think that's up for debate. I actually think that this team is going to be 1 or 2 like seeding in the East. I think they're going to be an incredible regular. I think they're going to be in the top 2.
So we'll have to get.
They can stay healthy.
We'll have to definitely discuss that when we do our preseason rankings and really get into it, because I'm gonna hold your feet to the fire for that one. But
I would stand by it.
We're also going
to top 4 until Jared Allen got hurt last season.
And then we're also going to talk about what Tyrese said about Darius Garland in that prediction show as well. So we'll get into that. About it. Well, let's get into it when we're all together and we can do like a huge prediction show. I know it probably got you fired up, just like it got my friend Brad.
Got me fired up.
It got Brad fired up as well when Tyrese said that. So Tyrese, if you're listening, We're gonna hold your feet to the
Getting
fire for
everybody
that
heated.
comment.
Getting
But
everybody heated out here.
what I will agree with you here is that I think it definitely does make Cleveland in that contention for top 4 at least, because of the fact that, again, they got rid of some guys that probably made them a little bit different. Obviously, we talked about the defense last year. We talked about the way that they offensively played, the way that they kind of used Evan Mobley, the way that they kind of went with the Sexland lineup, to Colin Sexton and Darius Garland. I'm excited for this squad because I think even though they got rid of one of my favorite guys in the draft, OG Abaji, which I think would have actually been a huge help for this team, maybe as like a role player, obviously off the bench, but I still think that this team is deep. It's solid. It has a lot of guys that could do a lot of different things on this roster. You have Caris LeVert, who, again, I said could come off the bench and even just help you out scoring wise. Again, it allows them to be versatile and switch up the guard position, where it doesn't necessarily mean that, Garland or Mitchell have to necessarily play all the minutes in the world. They can take a little bit of time off. Whether Gilbert Arenas agrees with that or not is up to him. But again, it allows those type of variables, different type of rosters. You don't have to necessarily go with we're going with our main attack and that's it. So from that perspective, like you said, Pete, I'm excited for the Cavaliers. And just to kind of go back, the reason why I'm in agreement in terms of the original question that I posted in the poll was, will the Knicks regret, or maybe not regret going for, maybe the question I should have said, will the Knicks regret not acquiring Donovan Mitchell? And I'll say no. And the reason why I'll say no is because at the end of the day, they have to get rid of RJ Barrett. They have to get rid of Quentin Grimes. And again, whatever you think of Quentin Grimes is not really the big factor. RJ Barrett to me is the big factor, because that was the guy that you originally were saying, okay, we can team up Barrett and Donovan Mitchell. At least Knicks fans were saying that. Maybe not you specifically, but the Knicks fans out there in the streets of New York City. And so I think if you just replace Barrett with Mitchell, I don't think anything necessarily changes about the Knicks roster. You still have a lot of guys that are still kind of on those prove-its. And again, you're going to be undersized with the guards if you go Brunson and Mitchell. And defensively, I think there'll be some liabilities.
Bottom 5 defense in the league if you get rid of RJ and just add Mitchell to the Knicks. This is why I'm very glad the Knicks didn't end up with Donovan. And I was pretty conflicted at first, because it's one of those things where this is easily the best player the Knicks would have had in the last 15 years, other than Carmelo. Carmelo is a better player. I didn't mean to say it the way I said it. Carmelo is better than Donovan Mitchell. But he's easily the best player since Carmelo. Let's put it that way, right? I think everybody would be in agreement based on how bad the Knicks have been for the last 10, 15 years, right? The problem is that it doesn't solve any of your problems. One, you're still a middle-of-the-road team. You're still middle of the road. There's so much work to do, and Donovan Mitchell genuinely is just not a fit with what the Knicks have. Any of the pieces that the Knicks have accumulated so far, any of the young talent, he's not really complimentary to any of them, unlike the bigs in Cleveland. The bigs in Cleveland are much more complimentary to Donovan Mitchell because of their switchability, because of how long they are, and the versatility. Like, that is really what it boils down to. And with the Knicks, you have Mitchell Robinson, who is as unversatile but still solid as you can be in the NBA right now. Like, he's so not versatile, but he's so good at the little things he can do that it adds value. But those things don't go with, you might as well be putting him with B-level Rudy Gobert, right? It's not that far off of that. He's not even anywhere near as good as Rudy, but still, we saw how that went in Utah. When it comes down to it, though, and this is my rationale. I mentioned it in the chat, during your stream the other day. With the assets that the Knicks have accumulated, and this is the thing that's going to go underspoken about the Knicks, no matter what they do right, whatever happens, and they deserve it. I'm not even trying to defend them necessarily, because they do deserve 99% of the criticism that they get. This offseason has not been bad for the Knicks. It truly has not been bad for the Knicks. They've gotten good contract extensions out of their young players, which has been unheard of for this team for 20-plus years. You got a ton of picks for players that were never going to play for the Knicks again, that shouldn't play for the Knicks again. And we kept all our young talent. This is a great offseason for the Knicks. The thing that is going to go underspoken about is now the Knicks are in lead position for any of the next unhappy star. They are in number one position for whoever the next person is. No matter what you think, who you are, if you hate the Knicks, they're in first place. They have so many assets, so many young players that clearly have value to other teams. Quentin Grimes clearly had value to Utah. They were going very hard for him by all the reports. Obi Toppin, same thing. These are guys that have only gotten better. And RJ too. Like, people seem to all of a sudden like RJ, even though nobody wanted to talk about him last season. But when it comes down to it, and this is what I said in the chat, there will be a better superstar than Donovan Mitchell that is unhappy in the next year. It's just the way it's been going in this league. It's what the league is nowadays. And you never know who it is. You never know. Maybe it is Kevin Durant in 6 months. Maybe things go so terribly in Brooklyn that the package has a less high asking price from Brooklyn. Maybe. Maybe it is Zion, who's been long rumored to want to play in New York. Maybe it's Zion. And I would say to anybody who thinks we missed out on Donovan Mitchell with all, like, why didn't we give all this stuff we have for Donovan Mitchell? Would you rather spend being the word of choice here? You're basically spending the commodity that is draft picks to buy a better player, right? Would you rather spend 8 first-round picks on Donovan Mitchell or 8 first-round picks on Zion Williamson, who can do everything that, Donovan Mitchell wishes he could do, and he's way bigger. I mean, that's the thing, right? Yeah. I would rather give up a mega haul for someone who is better than Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell does not play defense. Yeah. Maybe he will change it in Cleveland. He's an all-NBA player. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but he has limitations. He doesn't make you a championship contender, and he's certainly not worth the biggest haul in NBA trade history. He's just not.
Yeah. So, again, let us know in the comment section down below. What do you guys make of this story? Again, as we continue to monitor the situation, we obviously know that the Mitchell trade has gone through. This story has come out from Rosas. And let us know in the comment section down below or in the live chat if you guys are watching live with us right now. What do you guys think of this story? Are you guys in agreement with Pete talking about how they don't necessarily need the Knicks, that is, don't need Donovan Mitchell? Or are you on the other side and saying that the Knicks should have traded for Donovan Mitchell? Let us know in the comment section down below. And remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Again, all that stuff helps us grow and helps us continue to build a better community here on The Charge.